Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of the Intelligence Spotlight series. In this episode, we have a very special organization and people with us. It's the OSINT for Ukraine. OSINT for Ukraine is a nonprofit foundation dedicated to using open source intelligence to document war crimes, counter disinformation, and support accountability for crimes linked to the Russo-Ukrainian war. Founded in 2022, OSINT for Ukraine collaborates with other investigative organizations to verify and archive evidence for future legal proceedings and historical documentation. The foundation's projects, such as Project Mariupol, focus on creating a digital record of atrocities, supporting justice, and provide transparency regarding the conflict. Additionally, OSINT for Ukraine offers training and resources to civil society organizations working on similar goals. Today with us, we have Deniz Dirisu. He is the chairman and general director of OSINT for Ukraine. He specializes in international criminal law, OSINT, and atrocity crimes investigations. And along with Deniz, we have Janthe van Schaik. She's co-director of Center for Influence and Disinformation. And also, she has done her graduate on security studies from Leiden University and also specializes in OSINT, cybersecurity, counterterrorism, and intelligence analysis. Welcome to the Intelligence Spotlight series.
Thank you very much for having us.
It's an honor having both of you. So before we start into our discussion, I would like to know your stories, how you joined the realm of OSINT and what inspired you the most.
Of course, I'll start and then Janthe can continue with her part. What influenced me to go into OSINT would be the beginning of the war, the Russo-Ukrainian war. I myself have Ukrainian heritage, Ukrainian family, so it hit home when the war started. And I wanted to do something about it. I was finishing my advanced master's at Leiden University in international criminal law, and I was writing a thesis. It was thesis writing time, so around March, April, and I could not focus on it for some reason. So I decided to write a thesis about OSINT, specifically OSINT evidence, like open source evidence, comparing how it would apply within Ukrainian criminal procedure and the ICC Rome Statute. From there, I was part of a guest lecture where Hannah Bagdasar from the Bellingcat, now ICC, came and gave a lecture in March, again, 2022, to us about OSINT. And there, Bucha was mentioned, and the satellite imagery from Bucha was coming out just recently. I think it was 16th or 17th of March. And I thought to myself, I got my thesis, I got this lecture, what the hell? I'll gather a couple of my colleagues, friends, and we'll start digging. So that was it. In 2022, I launched OSINT for Ukraine, and that's how I got my experience in OSINT. I got it by just starting, just doing. And this is how a lot of people start in OSINT. They just get curious about something, passionate or motivated, and they go for it. And throughout the 2 years, I learned a lot. I gained a lot of experience. My international criminal background helped me, where I could specialize in a legal criminal section of OSINT with evidence and accountability investigations, which led me to consult international organizations in this matter. What I would say is that it has been an interesting journey. It has been probably, I'm very lucky to find OSINT, and I think it's sad that the war happened, but to achieve that mission, I chose OSINT as my tool. That would be my personal story of how I got into OSINT.
Thank you, Deniz. That's quite incredible. And the fact that you mentioned about curiosity, I guess that's a building block or the foundational step for every OSINTer. Thank you. Janthe.
So I really agree with the curiosity part, but yes, for me, I started actually during my bachelor's degree with this organization called the Syrian Emergency Task Force, where I was more concentrated on human rights focus. And during my bachelor, I quite developed more intelligence skills and was really focused on intelligence analysis, methodologies, and more geopolitical issues. And then I saw actually that OSINT for Ukraine was a student initiative that also debuted at Leiden University. And I was very involved in wanting to do something relating to the war, and I didn't know quite how to get involved, but I decided to give it a go and maybe see how I can apply my intelligence knowledge, but also my security-related crisis management knowledge to the field. And that's why I started with OSINT for Ukraine, mainly first in Project Mariupol, and then started developing more in research, intelligence, and more the wargaming areas. For me, also, as I started with more the intelligence side, I didn't quite know a lot about OSINT, like OSINT in general. But through the different workshops and talking with everyone on OSINT for Ukraine, I got to learning, and this curiosity really helped me into broadening my knowledge and getting more involved, and also being very curious about different organizations and different events that were organized. And reading a lot also helped me in, yes, learning more about OSINT tools and how to apply them in general.
Amazing. It was not just curiosity, but also passion of knowledge and how things can also inspire us, or having a cause in life. That's also a driving force behind many OSINTers. Let's talk about OSINT for Ukraine. It was quite an incredible name that I heard, and I thought maybe it's not an organization. Maybe it's just a project, or maybe it's an initiative. But later I found out that it's actually the work that you guys are doing is quite remarkable. So let's walk through the foundation of this organization. What was the inspiration behind it? How you came together and founded this incredible foundation, I would say.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it has been a journey. I mentioned to you about my thesis, the lecture, and we launched in end of April, May 2022. First try, we were a student collective. That was it. In 2022, that was it. And we were doing a very amateur stuff. And it was a big learning curve then. I took a lot of courses myself, but also got training from some of the experts I knew. Thankfully for them, they were experted in all sorts of intelligence, OSINT, and we were able to build our training capacity. So how we started with Project Mariupol was actually our flagship project. At first, it was called a record of evil, and it was just a basic sourcing thing. We wanted to do what kind of, let's say, Eyes on Russia did, but in our own method, because we started during the fall of Mariupol. And we want to honor the city of Mariupol and its people by naming our project in lieu of it. In 2022, we were able to get a couple of key people to our foundation, student collective, I would say. So we started this as university colleagues, friends at Leiden. However, it grew and our core team grew. What would become in the future, our board. So we started getting people who knew all sorts of intelligence, ex-military veterans, and some international criminal lawyers, a lot of master students that now are actually 2 years later doing it professionally. So it was a good time to build the core, get the people who will stay long term. 2023 saw our first round of changes. It's where we became a semi-professional initiative. This happened around, again, spring of 23, where we had our first big event, a Berlin hackathon event with the Pilecki Institute. There, we expanded from Project Mariupol into two separate categories, into international crimes investigations, because we saw not only we have to source these crimes, we should investigate them, and into disinformation avenue. But it wasn't still that solid how we would counter it. We're still doing articles and investigations, but they were more journalistic or even bordering advocacy. But we wanted to shed that skin. We wanted to become even more professional, impartial, and independent, because we want to make impact. And we solidified our vision that year too. It was truth, memory, and justice. We saw that not only we should source and collect, which is memory, information on atrocities, we should investigate them, justice, but we should debunk the lies about them. We believe countering disinformation, achieving justice, and archiving, securing historical data work together. They're not separate in separate bubbles. So we pushed forward to late 23 when we decided to incorporate. Around December 2023, we made that step. And at that time, we decided to launch our two operational departments. One of them is International Crimes Investigation Group that would investigate international crimes committed in Ukraine. We first started making articles, then we switched to actually sending evidence and supporting official investigations. The next branch is the branch that Janthe is directing, is CIDR. We launched CIDR as a effort to counter disinformation. CIDR is Center for Influence and Disinformation Research. And its aim was to conduct investigations to expose disinformation, Russian disinformation networks in Europe, because we had a lot of people in Germany, Berlin. So mainly the Berlin department was focusing on that. That said, we saw that the disinformation type, the disinformation wave is so big, so complex, and so sophisticated. And our efforts are misused just by exposing them, because any other journalistic outlet could do that, and they're bigger outlets than us. So we focused on countering them and coming up with innovative methods to do that. And I'm sure Janthe can tell you all about it later, and I'll leave it for her to explain the CIDR tangent of the foundation. With ICIG, International Crimes Investigation Group, and Project Mariupol, I can tell you that it went into two interesting directions. Through Project Mariupol, we opened our Research and Development Core, which basically is the parent group that controls Project Mariupol, where we have war crimes data, but then we added military locations from deep state to overlay them. So you could use an artillery range tool on the map to spot, for example, which unit was near a crime area and the range of the artillery they could possess. Of course, it's not perfect and incomplete, and we are still searching for more accurate military location data and weapons data, but more or less the concept and working second iteration is here. The 3.0 of Project Mariupol will be developed. It started as Project 1.0, a record of evil, Project 2.0, which was a gateway to evidence, and Project 3.0, we'll see. Hopefully it's a tool for accountability. And International Crimes Investigation Group collaborates closely with the R&D to make sure the verification of the crimes data and the military locations are more or less accurate. However, we still have some verification left to do specifically with location information, because even if we have the town, the exact street sometimes is off just because there's just so much data. And within our International Crimes Investigation Group, we have several task forces that focus on several branches of international crimes, war crimes against children, specifically child deportation, cyber, and financial, though we mainly focus on atrocity crimes. So they're all linked by this thing. And yeah, in 2024 of July, we incorporated with all this structure with us. So we're around more than 50, 60 people in the foundation. All of us do it pro bono, so it's not our full-time job yet. However, we hope to do so with our financial strategy in the coming years to make it a full-time position for all of us and to do it more professionally, to be able to make a good impact with our projects.
That's amazing to hear. And would you consider OSINT for Ukraine as a falcon, having one main project and then two wings of operation?
It was. In the semi-professional initiative, it was a falcon with Project Mariupol being the main project. However, now I think it would be a tripartite, is best to explain. ICIG, I would say, is our priority because we have the skill set and the connections there. We already collaborate with accountability bodies, NGOs like Clooney Foundation and police forces. Then we have our disinformation CIDR group, where we already conducted several projects that are successful, and Project Mariupol, which we're still looking for partners to collaborate and help us find more accurate data. I'd say these are the three main angles that we go. And then there are, of course, supporting elements, R&D, Gentech, public affairs.
Amazing. Janthe, walk us through your section where you focus mainly on disinformation and how that evolves, especially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, how it emerged and what was the first investigations that your team or department conducted?
Mainly the Center of Influence and Disinformation Research was first very based on investigative journalism and working on specific cases. My team now focuses more on the research area, just more intelligence-based and wargaming, for example. So I will walk you through a little bit what these two parts do. Mainly the wargaming side of CIDR is more focused on an educational tool. So it teaches students, professionals, and academics on disinformation warfare and how the disinformation spreads, and this goes through specific scenarios that are enacted. And then through a specific simulation, people can understand more about information warfare and how this comes into play. So we developed this with the volunteers to specifically teach and also inform about this information, the specific trends and narratives, by setting it into a futuristic scenario that we elaborate and that we try to also teach how individuals can make decisions based on a specific doctrine that is given to them. So we, as I said, this is more like an educational tool. And then we have the more intelligent side of CIDR, which is more focused on, as Denise said, exposing this information, but also informing and countering disinformation trends. So in this area, we do data collection. So we collect data on specific disinformation trends and narratives that can be exposed on social media. And we analyze the influence it has on the population by choosing a specific case or topic that we are investigating. Then we collect the data through specific nodes and sources that we identify and try to put into perspective the specific narratives. From there, we then do intelligence analysis and try to inform what the specific disinformation trends how they can evolve over time. And this also helps to analyze how disinformation over a specific period of time influences populations and individuals by also looking at, for example, intelligence or artificial intelligence into disinformation techniques, because we see that artificial intelligence has been used way more at the moment in disinformation trends and narratives. Overall, the Center of Influence and Disinformation Research really focuses on researching disinformation, informing and exposing disinformation trends and narratives.
Amazing to hear from you, Janthe. If you can recall, what was the first investigations your team conducted and which report would be available publicly for viewers to visit and to see like how that was the founding step for countering disinformation online?
So perhaps Denise can give a little introduction on that. What I can say is that we have published a report on the wargaming's effect that kind of also shows how disinformation is being spread, the specific narratives on what we can see in the disinformation realm. We are planning on posting more on this information, but that is also Christian's side, who posts a lot of investigations more on like investigative journalism side of it.
I think I can mention about the investigations that are already published with CIDR. So on Janthe's department, it's focused more on intelligence to stakeholders and providing insights. Intelligence would be a bit too much, but insights about disinformation trends. Looking into how this year we did a report on the Ukraine versus Russia genocide case, and we saw the narratives going around that. We hope to publish our report soon for not only high-level stakeholders, but also the public to see, to understand that this information is being used in legal cases, and legal cases are used in disinformation. It's a two-way exchange. And there was a specific methodology and collection process for those narratives. Hopefully, end of this year, the readers can see that. However, going back to what we've already published, two important publications that we did was the Russian House in Berlin that our colleagues in Berlin and Germany did. And that was a more journalistic investigation, not much from our specialty. However, that still involved a lot of OSINT, specifically getting videos and images from open sources about the connections of the people in the Russian culture house in Berlin to pro-Russian political entities and groups and persons in Germany, as well as photos of them doing events together, and then connections in social media, their connections to Russia, how they support the war, their public support, and propaganda attempts. That was OSINT was crucial in reporting in that. I would say this was more open source research rather than OSINT, because OSINT is a bit more forward looking, as well as it has the intelligence cycle properly. So there's an intelligence requirement to begin with, and to end with, there's a report. This was a more journalistic open source research endeavor, which I can tie the same conclusion to our Austria investigation. We did an investigation called Strudel of Influence. Again, it was by the guys who are adept in looking into German-speaking countries, and our journalists, open source researchers who looked into that. And we found also connections in Austria to Russian entities. So Austrian French politicians, and also some interestingly mainstream politicians who has ties or had ties with Russian politicians, Russian oligarchs, or Russian propaganda assets. Our open source research focused one on the bodies that Russia directly controls, the connectors, the intermediaries, and the people that are the closest, the Austrians, basically, the people in Austrian politics. So the bodies in the first one were Russian so-called cultural associations, outposts, fake diplomacy events like MUN kind of stuff, as well as other, again, for research centers, so-called.
Right.
Then the middle was connectors, basically focused on either non-Russians, but pro-Russian people, so Austrian pro-Russians, who are like useful idiots and puppets, who basically transfer the message from point A, the bodies, to point 3, or facilitate at least their exchange between the politicians. Sometimes the politicians directly engage with those bodies too, but after the war, they went into more indirect engagement, or at least covert.
And I guess that leads us to another question. I briefly read one of the reports about the Workers' Party in the UK, George Galloway, and the Russian influence within that party. On what scale Russia influenced politics in a place like the UK or EU in general, and how much of that has been fueled by Russian-led disinformation campaigns, which specifically, let's say, that were funded or managed by Kremlin.
Our colleagues, I wish our colleagues from Berlin could join, Christian. He could have explained it better. But what I can tell you is that Russian disinformation, and specifically within, I wouldn't say within disinformation, influence. So Russian influence operations, and within them, there's disinformation. So Russia uses propaganda, disinformation, and other methods to influence public opinion in the West. The UK is one of them. The EU is another, and America. So we're more knowledgeable in the EU and UK context, though because the American context is A, a little foreign, B, a little obvious to a person to look at it, because their politics is a bit more flamboyant, a bit more over the top, more identity politics. That said, Europe is going to that direction, I would say, as well. But yeah, we try to avoid these political stuff. We try to make our impact more, as we're an impartial body. We are an international organization. We're not funded by the Ukrainian government, or we don't explicitly support or don't support them. We support the Ukrainian people and the victims. Anytime we make an investigation, we want to make sure that point comes across, because we also focus on justice for victims and justice endeavors. We have to be impartial and independent. Though our name, OSINT for Ukraine, does not help with that and pigeonholes us there, we try our best. And we have our own biases, and we admit it, but we also, by using methodology that is explicit and we can show it, like you can see where we found the stuff, you can see any bias we have, so that kind of mitigates it both ways, both in it and in our ethical statements. So I wanted to give a little prologue with that, just to make sure people understand where we come from, because we're not all Ukrainians in this foundation. It's a multi-national personnel that work here. Starting with Germany, Germany has, I would say, the strongest pro-Russian ties in Europe. This would be because of A, a big Russian diaspora, and B, pro-Russian politicians, both overt and covert. And C, it is the remnants of post-World War II German politics. This need to be anti-war, this need to be neutral, this need that they cannot support one or other side of the war too much, because you know what happened in World War II. They have that trauma. And it is good that they try to work for their faults, but also it gives results like this where they really are not able to make their minds, because the Russian influence and disinformation impacts both left and the right. People think it's a right-wing phenomenon, but it is as much as the left-wing phenomenon too. An example of this would be in Germany, where in the beginning of the war, you had a lot of people going out for Ukraine, thankfully. But then something weird happened in 2023, where this whole anti-NATO attitude of the leftists in Germany, the remnants of the Red Army faction and the whole left-wing thing, radical left-wing. I also want to specify that left-wing, I meant radicals. And so we don't get into trouble. The radical left-wing with its radical, so let's say, overt communist agenda in Germany, or its very vehement neutrality, where there was, I think, I read a poster where there were feminists against supplying weapons to Ukraine, and there was feminists for Ukraine, and then there was like, no NATO, don't arm Ukraine, stop the war. It was playing into Russian propaganda. So their own beliefs also played into it. So it is not only that Russians are cunning and they're good at what they do, they are, and their disinformation is effective, but it is also stems from the even good, not I want to say bad, but even good beliefs of some people in neutrality or peace, because they're objectively good things. Again, neutrality not so much, but peace, 100%. No one's going to disagree peace is good, except psychopaths and war. But when Russia uses peace in its disinformation, that it had no option, peace, the only way to peace is to give in to Russia, then that becomes effective. And the same thing you can do for England and UK. I would say overall, on the left and the right, why Russian disinformation is effective is also because of the reason D. It's disillusion with Western status quo, the Western established government, the liberal, neoliberal order, where a lot of citizens become disenfranchised, either A, because of identity politics, B, because of economic conditions, C, because of outright lies, because the West hasn't been always a innocent angel as well. Again, countries, people make mistakes, do bad things, and I think that is also another big consideration to take.
Yeah, and I think the point that you mentioned, that even people's own beliefs could contribute to Russian propaganda unwillingly or unintentionally, is with a good example of the energy crisis in Europe after the war, which a lot of the German economy was dependent on the Russian oil and gas, and a lot of people were skeptical of cutting ties with Russia just because of the economic consequences for them. And that's why a lot of them may have thought about their own without trying to support Russia, but at the same time, it aligned with that narrative of being pro-Russia at the same time. I think this is the point where a lot of people can miss by thinking that, okay, everyone could be working for them, but while the belief thing is quite revealing. Janthe, you mentioned about the trainings and research that you're doing. I wanted to know, like, what method are you using in your work and how these methodologies are used for trainees, how much they can get from it. And is this the type of methodology aligned with all other organizations, or is it a unique methodology that you guys found it or created in your organization?
Specifically, the training that we provide is the war games that actually originates from military wargaming projects. We try to, through a simulation, understand what specific decisions can have, like how it can impact a specific context. We try to apply it to disinformation. We sat down, looked, okay, how can we provide, for example, academics or professionals with a scenario and the doctrine. So, for example, we have NATO and the Russian Federation. How can they interact with each other in a specific scenario by making decisions and see how this information can be spread in the sake of this specific scenario? How we did that was mostly coming up with this, with the rules of the game, which basically goes through specific turns and events that come to disrupt the decision-making process of the two groups. And it's like having a blue and a red team that then on each side try to discuss with each other what decisions they can make to either stop disinformation progresses or initiate disinformation on social media or surrounding a specific context. So we have elaborated 2 specific scenarios for now on, and we actually had one event where we did this wargaming process in person. We started by developing the war games in-house, so within the organization, looking at how can we elaborate the process, but also make it more interactive. And we came up with specific, for example, news-breaking moments that can totally catch the participants off guard. What is very interesting is that it's not a classic mode of teaching. It is not explaining what this information is, but rather prompting the participants to do their research and provide their orders that they submit after each turn with material evidence and evidence that how they can support and how it fits their doctrine. We also assess those decisions as referees based on how credible their order is, looking at the evidence and how it fits within their doctrine. And that also attributes them points or takes them points away, which goes further into the game afterwards. So it's a very simulative, but also interactive way of learning more about information warfare, I would say.
Wonderful. That was incredible to hear from you guys. I'm sure you guys are heavily also dependent on OSINT tools. It must be one of the favorite things for every OSINTer when they find out a new tool that eases their work and finding a new way to analyze a piece of information. Starting for you, Deniz, what was the first tool that you started to work with, and what is the favorite tool that you prefer others to learn about it?
I'll tell you one thing. Finding tools and making toolkits has become a job of itself, I would say, with the vast amount of tools being created daily and the, I don't know, hundreds of toolkits, Start Me pages that I saw, that I have, that our foundation has, that my friends have, that other centers have. So I'm a little overwhelmed, I would say, with the amount of tools there are, because some are paid, some are free, some are trial versions. Also, that is a little bit annoying. But with GitHub and open source coding, where you work with it. And then you have the AI tools, GPT. We use custom GPTs as well. One of them checks our OSINT reports. It checks our OSINT reports according to a 23 category matrix that we created, which we'll publish around January 2025 for OSINT researchers and journalists to understand the reliability of OSINT. And for now, that GPT, you submit reports, it gives you a percentage of reliability, but also explains its reasoning because we taught it to do. But I digress. I will go back to one of the first tools that I used, and I believe any OSINTer should use, is a virtual machine and a VPN together, OPSEC. People overlook information security and operational security, and you can talk about PERSEC, so many acronyms, but security tools. I think they're the most important tools in your arsenal. The virtual machine solves a lot of your problems. Of course, having another laptop for research, though in OSINT funding is not the best. So we work with what we got personally, because what we do at our foundation is still not full-time. But even at home for our researchers and our people and other readers, you don't need a dedicated machine. You can use OSINT tools to bridge the gap of resources. And what other tool I like, and maybe after the interview I can send you a toolkit, it is, I can't name one. There's so many, and I would say toolkit on social media intelligence, like analyzing Instagram followers or Instagram viewers, helpful, Tegestat, Telegram statistics, and just looking at accounts. So I think they're the most helpful. Facebook tools as well, and Invid Verify, that's a nice tool. Then TinyEye, I also like that. But also then you have the reverse image search of browsers. As I said, I can go on many tools, but I would say anything I would emphasize, the only thing I would emphasize is security tools.
That's quite important as well, because after all, being a researcher, just an information consumer on the internet, whatever you do, you still leave a digital footprint behind or digital traces behind. So you gotta be very careful. And virtual machine provides that relative safety for research. However, still, we will never be safe completely, but still that we at least create a wall to prevent harmful materials coming into our computers. Janthe, and what's your favorite tool, and which one do you recommend for others to learn and master it?
Coming from someone who started with zero knowledge about OSINT tools and absolutely was very overwhelmed by the amount of tools that was available and the less explanation that I could find about how to use the tools, I think my advice would be to start with the most basic tools. I started with Google Maps, Google Earth Pro, and looking at, okay, how can I look at an area in history, for example? Okay, how can I find that? How can I geolocate? How can I do all these things before starting to move to more complex tools or more evolved OSINT tools? So this is one of my main advice. The other advice would be to start looking at, for example, reverse imagery. As Deniz said, VPN is for me also the one I would say I started with, because I wanted to make sure that I was surfing the internet in a secure way, making sure that I researched this information without putting myself into dangerous positions. So that is something I recommend. And for the OSINT tools, starting with looking at one in specific and then seeing, okay, what are the other tools in the same area that I can use? Can I see, first look more into one specific tool, seeing everything you can find about that, and then moving to the other one instead of overwhelming yourself with all the specific tools you can use, because the most simple tools can also bring you very far in OSINT. So that would be my advice for, handling the OSINT tools in the beginning. Yeah.
Wonderful. And one piece of advice from both of you, what would be for young journalists or people who are passionate about OSINTs, especially like students or those coming from conflict regions that are interested in doing OSINT and trying to be part of a bigger cause? What advice would you give?
I think I have two small pieces of advice I'll give. First one is you do not need to know technical skills or be technically into programming or, let's say, geospatial, geoint. You can learn that later down the line or gain the experience from mentors, colleagues, and etc. What you need is to understand methodology. What you need is to be able to do the basics well, such as information collection, being able to open, as I said, a virtual machine, being able to scour the internet, good at searching. So if you do the basics, and the main basic to be good at is searching and hypothesis creation, so setting your parameters, I think that will get you the furthest. Because a lot of times people either don't know what they're looking for or don't know how to find what they're looking for. Knowing that gets you anywhere more than the technical skills. The second piece of advice, join communities, find mentors and partners. I will give a shameless plug for our Discord community, OPO Open Network, where students are our bread and butter. They've been always our bread and butter. We were students when we started this. We have a lot of master's, bachelor's level students who are into OSINT, who are in volunteering with us, or are in the community. We do seminars, trainings, and mini war games, as well as guest lectures on OSINT, disinformation, and other techniques. And I would highly recommend people to join either our community or like-minded communities to learn and to be part of a community. I think that is the strength of OSINT, collaboration.
Amazing collaboration. And from you, Janthe?
So I really agree with Deniz said as well. My main advice would be to connect, reach out to anyone in the OSINT field. We're all here to learn together. I'm also a master student, and I started from learning from others and reaching out and seeing how I can apply my knowledge that I already have and learn other tools and other skills as well. So I think it's really a learning community where we all try to find out all the specific skills that we don't have, but that others might have. And attending conferences, learning, going to specific trainings. The war games is a really nice way to also understand how disinformation works, even if you don't have any knowledge about it. And such as Deniz said, you don't have to have any technical knowledge to start in OSINT. It's really about learning these basics, learning how to be safe as well, ensure your security, and just connect with all the individuals in the fields to understand more about how to use the tools and apply them and have a specific framework, so like the methodology, as Deniz said.
Thank you so much, OSINT for Ukraine. Thank you, Deniz, Janthe, for joining this episode of the OSINT of the Spotlight, Intelligence Spotlight series. I was so into intelligence talking today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having